All right, this is the second last video that I want to share with you about how to write your critical analysis papers. And this one, I just want to go through what you need in your body paragraphs, like what I'm going to be looking for, the kind of things that I'm going to be grading you on, and so forth, and how to sort of construct that. I mean, we've been through things like transitions and reporting expressions and reporting verbs and all of these kind of structural things before, so make sure you include those in your paragraphs. But I just want to go through some fundamentals about what you need in your paragraphs. So right in front of you here, what I have right here is a paragraph from my sample paper on Blackboard. So it's a paragraph from my sample critical analysis paper. What I want to point out is just a few things. Every single one of your body paragraphs need to have a topic sentence. That is the main or the controlling idea of your paragraph. What is this paragraph going to be about? You need to lay that out in a topic sentence at the beginning of each body paragraph. Okay, so I've highlighted my topic sentence here in red. Okay, so every single paragraph needs this topic sentence. As I said before in the previous video, your topic sentences need to follow the development and logical development of your thesis statement. Okay, so every single paragraph needs to have one of these topic sentences. What's this paragraph going to be about? Other things that you need to have in your paragraph, what I've done here in purple is basically a summary. So I'm summarizing things that Carr says in his article that I then want to go on to analyze. So here is all that kind of stuff in purple. So summarize the points, illustrate those points to the reader. What points are you going to be engaging with in order to support your topic sentence? Okay, so I've put that here in purple. I've highlighted in yellow direct quotation or paraphrase from Carr's article. So make sure to have direct quotation and or paraphrase in your article as well, or in your paragraphs. And in green here and down here and at the bottom, I have my own analysis. So how do I engage with these summarized points and with these direct quotations that I take from the article? So basically, your paragraphs need to be made out of these different things. The claim in red, summary of points that you want to engage with from the article in purple. You need to have direct quotations and or paraphrased points from the article, which are correctly cited and so forth, which I'll go over in a minute. And you need to have your own analysis. So what do you think of those points? Like what's your point about the ideas that you're engaging with? Okay, and how does that support what you say here in your topic sentences? Okay, I urge you to read closely the sample paper. Okay, and you can see how I've structured things and laid things out, and I've structured my paragraphs and so forth. But your paragraphs need to be made of topic sentences, summary, direct quotation, and analysis of those points. Okay. All right. The second thing that I want to go through with you guys, is quotation integration. Again, this is another thing that students sort of fall down on. They lose points because they just don't know how to integrate quotations properly. And as I say, there are 3 steps to doing that. So there are 3 steps to properly integrating a quotation in your paper. The very first thing that you need to do, well, first of all, you need to find a relevant quotation. You need to find a good relevant quotation that you're going to analyze and use in your paper. So that involves close reading. But the first thing you need to do is introduce that quotation and add necessary context for the reader. Okay, you need to situate that quotation for the reader, otherwise it just is not going to make sense. Okay, what I mean by context is give reference to the parts that immediately precede and follow a quotation to clarify its meaning so it can be fully understood and assessed. Okay, so give context to quotations. I will give you some examples and so forth about that down here in a minute. So choose your quotation, introduce your quotation, and give necessary context for the reader. Secondly, you need to cite the quotation using MLA documentation. And finally, you need to explain the quotation. Like, why is this quotation relevant? Why have you included this quotation? What does it mean? And how are you going to use it? How are you going to analyze it? Okay, so these three things you need whenever you integrate a quotation. Okay, so provide context and introduce the quotation, cite the quotation, and then explain the quotation. It's a three-step process. So don't just throw a quotation in without any kind of introduction or explanation or citation. It's like throwing a baby into a pool and just expecting it to swim. All right? Most babies are going to just go down to the bottom of the pool. They're going to drown. That's a horrible analogy, but it kind of sort of illustrates what I'm trying to say. Okay, so you need to give your quotations support. You need to introduce them, you need to explain them, and you need to cite them. Otherwise, they're just not going to make sense at all. So let me go through a couple of examples with you about how to introduce and integrate a quotation. So as I say here, for example, let's say that I agree with Carr that the internet is affecting the way I read and think. I therefore want to use the following quote, this quote right here, in my paper. So I've read the text and I took out this quote because I think it would be a good one to use in my paper. Okay, so our ability to interpret text, to make the rich mental connections that form when we read deeply and without distraction, remains largely disengaged. That is a quotation, a direct quotation from Carr's article. So as I said up above here, there are three steps. First, I need to introduce and provide context for the quotation. So this is what I do, okay? I say something like this. Carr talks about traditional reading and reading online. He states, our ability to interpret text, to make the rich mental connections that form when we read deeply and without distraction, remains largely disengaged. What this little sentence here does, and this little reporting verb does too, is introduce the quote for the reader. This part right here gives context. Carr is talking about traditional reading or the difference between traditional reading and reading online in this particular part of the article. So that provides context for the reader. Okay, Carr talks about traditional reading and reading online. Here I've just given one of those little reporting verbs just to tell the reader that this is a quotation from Carr. It's not something that I've just dreamt up, or it's not from me, it's from Carr. So I can say something like he states, or he argues, or he postulates, or something like that, some kind of verb. Okay, but you introduce the text with context, and you can use a reporting verb in there as well. There's another way you can do it too. So I say, Carr argues there's a difference between traditional reading and reading online. You can go straight into a colon and then give the quote after that. But the same thing. Okay, this sentence gives context. It introduces the quote for the reader. Okay, so introduce your quote with context. Secondly, you need to cite the page number of where the quotation is located. Now, as I say here, my copy of Carr's article is located in a textbook and which has page numbers. So there are page numbers within my reference. Okay, so I can give the page number down here. Most of the time, you guys are going to be taking source material that comes straight from the internet, where there is no page numbers and there are no paragraph numbers. So all you guys want to do, if you're citing Carr or Amy Chua or Hitchens or whatever article that you're engaging with, if there are no page numbers at all, you just put the last name in the citation. Okay, that just tells the reader that this quote comes from Carr, and then they can go to look at your works cited page, and they can figure out that, okay, this quotation comes from that particular text, or that particular edition of the text. All right, but because I have page numbers in my edition, I can tell the reader exactly where that quotation comes from. Okay. All the little things about MLA, when you give a short quotation, that's anything that's under 3 lines long, or when you integrate a text and it doesn't flow over sort of 3 lines in your page, then you can put it into a short quotation. Okay, so 3 lines or under. All right. So what you want to do is provide quotation marks right here. So at the beginning of the quote and at the end of the quote. you put the parentheses after the quotation marks in a short quotation. Okay, so quotation marks right here, and then you add the parentheses, right after the quotation marks. So you do parentheses, page number, or last name if there are no page numbers, close the parentheses, and the period comes after. Okay, so don't put the period here. Okay, I see a lot of people doing that. Okay, don't do that. That's wrong. And you'll get marks taken off for that. The period in a short quotation always comes at the end. Okay, so you introduce the quotation, you cite the quotation by giving the page number or the last name of the author if there isn't any page number, and you provide quotation marks, parentheses, and a period after the quotation. Finally, as I say here, you need to explain what the quotation means and its relevance to whatever point you're making in your paragraph. How does this quotation relate to your own analysis? Why are you quoting this for the reader? Don't just quote if it's just going to be filler or summary. Only use quotations that you're going to analyze, okay, that illustrate whatever point you're trying to make. Okay, so you have to dig up relevant quotations. So this is just to give you it all again. I introduced the quote. Carr talks about traditional reading and reading online. Context. He states, introduce the quote, our ability to blah, 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 blah. Okay, then I give the citation, which I just went over. The last thing you want to do is explain the quotation. Don't just move on to another point. You haven't explained anything to the reader. Why is this quote relevant? Why are you using it in your paper? How are you going to analyze it? So you can say something like, what Carr is saying here is, and then you go on to explain what it means. And then you can use some analysis. It's definitely true that, because, etc., etc. Furthermore, Carr is therefore correct in pointing out that. So you go on to analyze whatever point he's trying to make in this quotation. Okay? The basic point is you have to introduce your quotes and give context. You have to cite it correctly using MLA guidelines. And you have to explain quotations at the end. Okay? Don't just leave it up for the reader to make sense of the quotation. You have to explain the quotation for them and explain why it's relevant. Finally, if, however, you're quoting text that takes up 4 or more lines of the text, when you integrate it into your paper, you need to formulate what's called a block quotation. So for example, here's another point. Okay, so I introduced this quotation here. So this is the quotation from the text that I want to use. It's a monster. Okay, I want to use all of this in my essay. Okay, it's a monster quotation. First of all, again, same as with a short quotation, I introduce the quotation with context and some sort of a reporting verb in there as well. So Carr concedes the point that he might be wrong about the internet, just as other historical figures were wrong to be worried about the invention of, worried about the invention of writing or the printing press. He admits, and then I give the quotation. So again, up here, I give my context and I introduce the quotation. This is where I cite the quotation. The only difference here, you see, it's an absolute monster. Okay? It's not 3 or less lines like this quotation was up here. Okay? It's not 3 or less lines, which can be easily integrated into a sentence. This is an absolute beast of a quotation. So you want to formulate this into a block quotation. Anything that goes over 4 or more lines in the text when you quote it. Okay? So what you want to do to formulate a block quotation, if you're quoting this amount of text, is get rid of the quotation marks, first of all. All right, get rid of those. Put your cursor just before the quotation and press return once. Okay, that puts it onto another line. Next, you need to highlight the whole text. Okay, the whole quotation right here. And then you're going to go over to this toolbar over here, which is called increase indent. You're just going to press that one time. Okay, I think you can also press tab, but I use this function up here. Okay, that indents the text right here. Okay, that's what you need to do when you quote a block quotation. Finally, as I say down here, you also need to cite it. You don't, as you would do in a short quotation, give the citation here. Okay, you would not do that in a block quotation. Okay, what you want to do is get rid of the period here and put it at the end of the citation. It's a subtle difference between in-text quotations and block quotations. Okay. Finally, you need to explain the quotation. So you go back to your original alignments and you explain what the quotation means here. What the quotation means here. So what car means here is, and then you explain, etc., etc. Okay, and you would use the rest of your paragraph here to explain the quotation and explain to the reader why it's relevant to your analysis and the point that you're trying to make. So there are two things: short quotations and block quotations. But for each, you need to introduce with context and some sort of reporting verb. You need to cite the quotation, give it its page number if the edition that you have has page numbers, or the last name if there is no page numbers. And finally, you need to explain the quotation at the end. Okay, so that is quotation integration.